Welcome to this edition of What's the Score? Let me remind you, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please click the like button wherever you listen to this program. And if you'd like to support this and future programs, I encourage you to become a patron via patreon.com. There'll be details to follow in the middle of the program. We couldn't do the program without our patrons, so thank you. And enjoy today's wonderful podcast. Today's program made possible by patrons like you. Welcome to where we celebrate music from the movies. From the golden age to present day, we've got it all covered. We talk to those in the entertainment industry and find out about their favorite scores. You found the podcast, What's the Score? I'm your host, Frank R. Wilson. So sit back, relax, grab a popcorn, and let's see what we'll be hearing today. Recognize that music? It's a favorite of our guest today. Now, our guest is not an actor, a musician, or even connected to the entertainment industry in any way. However, that does not disqualify him from being a guest. Now, he was a co-host of a radio show in the 80s and 90s celebrating film music, and that was before it was cool. This knowledge of film music is evident from the fact that he has over 3,000 soundtracks in his library. He's been a newspaper reporter, a public information officer for a police department, and currently runs a city's history museum. He also has one of the largest collections of movie memorabilia I've ever seen, many of which are from the James Bond series. Now, it's that last point that brings me to say that we've been lifelong friends for, dare I say, 40 years or somewhere thereabouts, because of our love of James Bond, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to welcome on the program today. So I hope all of you will please join me in welcoming our guest, Brian Hughes, to the program. Hi, Brian.
Hey, Frank. Just absolutely delighted to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. I really am. I mean, we've been lifelong friends, and I've always marveled at the collection that you've amassed, not just of James Bond, but of movies in general. So I know you're a huge fan of everything having to do with film and musicals and things like that. So I think you're the perfect guest for today. So I'm looking forward to our chat.
I will try not to sound totally retarded.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure you'll do a fine job with that. As all my listeners know, I always like to find out a little bit about the background of the individual. So I was hoping that maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of like growing up and family. Maybe everything that leads up to when you started at college, if you wouldn't mind kind of giving us that background.
I would be absolutely delighted because I really had a wonderful growing up childhood. Not everybody can boast that they were raised on top of a mountain in northwest New Jersey, primarily because people don't realize that northwest New Jersey is just stunningly beautiful. We get all four seasons. And our mountain was called Way Mountain. It's in the foothills of the Appalachians, believe it or not. And it was a small community of about 800 people, except in the summer when all the summer people would come up from New York, and then it would about double in population. But it was a delightful place to grow up. And my parents were loving. They took good care of my little brother and me. I did not realize until much later that we didn't have much money because we were so happy. So, that shows the folks knew what they were doing, I guess. But one of the things that I loved and my mom loved and my little brother loved was going to the movies. And to go to the movies, well, you had to come down off the mountain to start with. And the closest movie theater was about half an hour away.
Wow.
It was a drive-in theater in Warwick, New York, which is still there. And it actually has a second screen, but it's still a drive-in.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's a
and the
rarity.
mo it really was, and it had a wonderful little old-fashioned downtown theater where actually I saw The Sound of Music for the first time. So it was a hallowed ground. So when they knocked it down and put in a Burger King, to this day, to this day, I refuse to go in that Burger King because it was a sacrilege on the ground where I saw The Sound of Music. And I know this is going to be airing quite a bit after we record it, but today happens to be the 60th anniversary of the release of The Sound of Music,
Oh,
and
wow.
it is my absolute favorite film. The story of the Trapp family singers has always been fascinating to me, but it was also my first movie disappointment because this whole story was just so fascinating. The scenery around Salzburg, Austria, it was stunning. So I was, I think, about 12, maybe 13 when I saw this. Well, I could not wait to get home and look up the Salzburg place in the family's Compton encyclopedias. And there came this horrible devastation. And I'm looking at the map, and it shows that Salzburg is right next to, of all places, Bavaria in Germany. So if you climb every mountain and ford every stream to escape the Nazis, you're not going to do it by climbing the mountain behind Salzburg because you land actually you climb that mountain, you land actually in Berchtesgaden where Hitler had his house. So
Details, details.
I know. So I took the yeah, I took the encyclopedia to mom and I said, Mom, what gives? You know, we saw last night, we saw them climbing the mountain. Later, I learned that scene was actually shot right near the Obersalzberg, where Hitler's house was actually located. And my mother had to explain to me, well, you know, a lot of times in the movies that we see, they shuffle the facts around if they're using facts at all, and to make it more exciting. It makes it more dramatic, and that's it was a disappointment. But then I started to get an understanding about movies, and I said, well, you know what? They're doing it to entertain me. Let them shuffle the facts. But anyway, that was it. And going to the movies was it was a rare treat. And it would usually involve a stop at Dairy Queen or something. So I got to see a lot of films when I was younger. But that also got supplanted. We were actually less than an hour and a half outside of New York City. And my mom belonged to a Broadway matinee club. These were cool things they had back then, but every couple of months or so, the club would have a get together at a matinee at a Broadway show. I remember being really captivated because she was taking me there when I was like 5 years old.
Wow.
And my mom later told me everybody would frown if somebody came in with a youngster, a toddler. Um, I remember images, I don't remember the specific shows, but I remember watching them and thinking, wait a minute, those are real live people up there. And I also remember thinking they're doing that just for me. Never mind these hundreds of other people in the movie or in the theater. So I got a love of Broadway that combined with this love of movies. And I was one of those people, and I have since discovered people used to do this, but they would sit down when the TV guide came in and they would mark all of the movies they were going to try to watch this week. Uh, it became more difficult when we got cable, of course, because you had a choice of a lot more movies. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
but anyway, that
what a great opportunity, though, given where you lived,
yeah.
to not only, most everybody across the country could enjoy movies, but very few people could enjoy being able to watch Broadway shows. Now, later on, you ended up attending Tulane University.
One of my experiences throughout all 5 years, because I was in architecture school, which is a 5 year professional program, and I joined the cinema club. And that was so neat because we were one of 6 schools in the United States that projected in 35 millimeter. So it was really an authentic film experience. It wasn't a little 16 millimeter camera puttering away in the back of the room like in
Yeah.
school. So I was on the cinema committee for 5 years, and that was a great experience. And as you become a little more senior in the club, you get to have more influence in selecting the films until it got to my senior year, which was my 5th year. And the cinema committee, as a grateful appreciation of all of my years of input, blah, 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 allowed me to do a James Bond film marathon. And we started at 6, and I think you were there for that.
I
I
don't,
think you
it
came.
might have been. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
jeepers, my memory
I
spoils me
I
at the moment, but
I think you came down for that because we had like Jimmy Strickland and all these buddies that we had who were James Bond fans, and we set up a hospitality suite in the projection balcony in the back of the theater, and we had snacks and we had a little fridge up there and all kinds of. So we just had cool time. But anyway,
well, that
every James Bond film ever projected started at 6 o'clock on a Friday and went through, I think it was like 10 o'clock Sunday night. And
wow, wow.
just
Well, that gives a good background as to how you developed your love of film and film music and those sorts of things. So that all makes sense. And even though I've known you all this time, I learned a few things myself. So I appreciate that. You've been very generous with your choices of cues that you want to play for us, and it's very difficult for me to fit them all in, but I'm determined to try and fit a lot of these in. The first film I thought I would highlight, score, is one that you chose from the film The Great Escape.
yeah,
Tell us a little bit about why you wanted to choose that amongst your favorites.
World War II films, I guess after the James Bond films, is my favorite genre, and it just interests me so much to see how actual events are portrayed and to see how fictitious events are portrayed. Because, America was only in the war for less than 5 years. Um, but even while the war was going on, World War II films were being made. Wake Island was one of them that actually used footage from the battle, and the American public got to see a battle that we lost, but it was done so heroically that they were able to really appreciate our armed forces out there and to see what they were doing. So anyway, World War II films have been going on ever since the war itself. War ended, World War II films are going on. Right now, I'm reading a book about the making of the Dirty Dozen. But you would ask me about The Great Escape. Stunning, stunning score by one of my favorite composers, Elmer Bernstein, and I'm
Mm,
sure you've discussed him a lot.
oh yeah.
Yeah, but this one was just sweeping and grand. And when I was a kid, I had gotten the book by Paul Brickhill, The Great Escape, from one of those scholastic book fairs that they have at your school. I just could not put that thing down to the extent that I was not hollered at per se because I was reading true history, but I was reading true history in science class. So um, it was suggested that maybe I open a different book.
Well,
But just,
let's have a listen to this cue then for ourselves. Again, this is from the film The Great Escape,
yeah,
written by one of the most prolific film composers, certainly of, I guess, what you would call the Silver Age of film music, Elmer
exactly.
Bernstein. Let's have a
Yeah.
listen. So, what is it that you would say got you into to film music? Was there like a particular film or series of films that you kind of say, "Oh, wow, I kind of like this"? Because I mean, when you and I were kids growing up, it wasn't, usually we were listening to rock and roll and that sort of thing. Film music was kind of like way out there. So, what was it that
Oh,
got you
yeah.
into it?
Yeah, I was probably the squarest kid in my school. But you begin to become slightly aware. You'll hum a theme song. The first movies really that my mom would take me to were in fact musicals, but they were kids musicals like Mary Poppins, and that of course is filled with music, but also it had a gorgeous instrumental score under there. And I
Yep.
didn't concentrate on that as much as I did the fun songs. But later on, especially by late middle school or so, I was aware of the music in the background of the films. I got to thinking, gee, that's awfully clever how that, just happened to fit right around the action. Wow. I was still thinking people wrote all the music and recorded it well before the film was made, but, eventually I learned otherwise.
Right.
But the fact that you can take maybe I won't say a boring scene, but a scene that needs a little kick in the rump and augment it with just the perfect score just shows the importance of the film. And we talked about James Bond earlier. You look at something like the gyrocopter scene in You Only Live Twice, without that music in the background, the combination of the James Bond theme and the 007 theme, and just the sweeping, glorious music that John Barry wrote for You Only Live Twice, that scene, I think, would have seemed to drag on forever. But the music just really bumped it up, and I think was as exciting as the scenery up on the screen. And I discovered this as we went along. And I think where I really became aware of it was when my friend Joyce and her sister Donna and my best friend Charlie and I all bundled into their mother's car and we went to the drive-in and we saw The Three Musketeers, and that was the early 1973, maybe two or three
Okay.
version. And, because we were cool by this point, we were like in seventh or eighth grade. So we weren't certainly going to sit in the station wagon with Joyce's mom. No, we went down and we sprawled out on the grass in front of the screen. And we all got cricks in our neck because you're supposed to have been sitting farther back. But hey, we were cool. But that score that Michel Legrand wrote for it was just epical. The chase scenes and the sword fighting, it was just swashbuckling music to the nth degree. And that was one I really wanted to find, that soundtrack. Later, my mom took Charlie and me to see Jaws. And we had one of those situations where after the movie we went outside and it was pouring rain and nobody wanted to step off the sidewalk into the parking lot to run to the car, not just because the parking lot was flooding, but because there might be a shark in there. But the music, the John Williams score, and there's the famous opening one, but there were also great selections throughout. And he wrote all of this cool music, and I understand the orchestra he used was a lot smaller than he is now used to. Still, he got a lot of sound with a lot of great stuff from it. And, when I'm one of those who, when you take a vacation, I shoot lots of video. And yes, I stand there with a video camera. But then I shoot it with the thinking of, I want to edit this when I get back and what music would go perfectly behind here. So would this be a good time to introduce one of my cues? I don't know. Uh,
Well,
anyway,
you talking about one of your selections?
yes.
Which one were you talking about?
Well, I was talking about Out to Sea.
Okay, yeah, I thought I was going to play something else when you were talking about James Bond, but now you switched over to Jaws. So yeah, we can play Out to Sea. So let's talk about that then. What was it that you like about that particular cue?
I like that it's very jaunty. I know, and you realize what happens once they get out in sea, and Bruce the shark goes haywire on their little boat. We're going to need a bigger boat.
Yeah.
But just that piece of music, I've used that I think a couple times in my travel videos, and one of them, my roommate and I were having lunch in Neptune Square in Bologna in Italy, and we were just sitting on the steps, and this cool promenade of just all kinds of people went by, including one lady who walked right up and was begging, and I had put my camera down on the steps next to me and just had it running. And later I edited together all these snippets with the background remaining the same, but just this promenade of humanity going past, including the poor begging lady, and Out to Sea just ached for itself to be played behind these scenes. So that's why I selected it. And when you play it, we'll hear just how much fun it is, and how lively it is, how it teased us when you watch the film into thinking, oh, this is going to be cool. They're going to go out and have a great time, buddies out on the boat kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Then it goes totally wrong.
All
So,
right. Well, let's have a listen to that for ourselves. And that sounds like a great description, but I know exactly what you're saying and why you're saying it. This is
okay.
again from the film Jaws. The cue is called Out to Sea, and it's written by the maestro John Williams. I mentioned in the intro to the program that you, I think primarily during the 80s and 90s, actually hosted a radio program that was about film music and musicals and those sorts of things. And that was,
Yeah.
I would guess, pretty much an oddity at that time. There wasn't a lot of radio
But
programming, and there certainly wasn't any podcast at that time or anything. How did that radio program come about?
Well, actually, it was something I enjoyed when I got to school, and somebody told me about it. They said something, "Oh, you love movies. You need to listen to this program." And it was on Sunday afternoons after lunch, so would have had time to go to the dining hall and get some lunch in me. And then I usually would play it. I was in architecture school, so I would often have to be at my drawing board on a Sunday, getting ready for a presentation the next morning. And it was just great music to work to. It was hosted by a guy who became my friend. His name was Keith Estuto. He is an attorney somewhere here in Florida. And the it was a combination of Broadway and film. He called it Best of Broadway, but that was a misnomer because he worked in a lot of film music. And it moved on. I graduated, and a fellow whose name was also Keith, and I'll be dang if I remember his last name, but he was hosting it. And then he took off to study in England, and I would substitute for him every now and then. And I just had the greatest time. But he was strictly a Broadway purist. He said, "No, you can't go playing film music." And I said, "Well, could I at least play music from a film version of a Broadway show?" And he grudgingly acknowledged that. Well, one day I committed a sin, and I ended that particular episode of The Best of Broadway, it was still called, with the Ballad of Gilligan's Island. And he was so furious. He called me up at home about that. We don't play any TV thing. Well, what ended up happening was so many people called the radio station. They said, "Oh, that reminds us of back when Keith was running the show. And oh, we loved having film and TV themes in there." So that did it. Well, Keith went off to school and said, "At least please play original Broadway as much as you can," because he knew it was out of his hands by this point. So, at this point, one of my real good buddies, Derek Toten is his name, he started doing a Wednesday night special. They had an open slot, and this is all on WTUL in New Orleans. It was the Wednesday night special, I think they called it, and he would play orchestral film music. And I loved that show as well. He liked my version of the Broadway show. And so we decided to team up, join forces, and the program director at the time, a big towering guy named Ivan Bodsky, said, "Why don't you call it Stage and Screen?" Because we couldn't think of a good name for it that combined everything that we liked about it. So Stage and Screen it became. It was, I would point out, the evolution of the Best of Broadway, and it remains the longest running show on WTUL in New Orleans. And it is still carried on. Derek still hosts it. And it was a lot of fun because one of the things about collecting all the stuff that I collect is, yeah, I like looking at it. I like knowing that over there in the cabinet on the other side of the room here in my library, I have all these CDs and vinyl albums and everything else. They don't do any good if they're just sitting there. It's stuff I like to share. So, and the same with Derek. He moved all of his CDs into albums, and he would come in juggling like 3 or 4 huge albums filled with CDs when he would put it on. But we did it together, and a couple of these cuts that I have queued up here from that show relate to a kind of running gag that we had between ourselves. We didn't share this with our listeners, but he loved a Broadway cast album to the old musical Doonesbury, based on the comic book strip. And he would always play something from that, and I didn't particularly like it, and I would tease him. So I would counter then with music from the musical version of Lost Horizon, which is one of my secret favorites. You know, everybody has a secret favorite that they gotta like, even though the rest of the world hated it. But I loved it. It was just so ridiculously silly. It was marvelous. But won't go into detail about Lost Horizon, but then I would counter with that. So we would always compromise on the last song that we played on the show. And one week I think he'd pick, and the next week I'd pick. This one particular time, we were kind of jokingly, arguing with each other. And I said, "Okay, here, why don't we end with this?" So I pulled out album jacket to the Magnificent Seven, and oh yeah, more Elmer Bernstein. That's awesome. Let's go ahead and play that. Well, back at home when I was pulling them, I had pulled Magnificent Seven out, and I had put Lost Horizon in there. So I pulled it out, queued it up, and we said our goodbyes, and then hit the turntable. And he looked at me in shock, and he goes, "You fooled me!"
And this is live radio, right?
Yes, yeah, live radio. So there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah.
Well, since you mentioned Lost Horizon, let's go ahead and listen. You had chosen something from that.
Yeah, this is the title song, a vocal by Sean Phillips. Absolutely beautiful opening title of, just drifting through the clouds over the mountains. I think the song is very pretty.
All right, well,
yes.
let's have a listen for ourselves. And written by?
The wonderful Burt Bacharach and Hal David.
Oh, wow, perfect. All right.
The epitome of both of their careers, I think. It's just, some of the music is kind of insipid. I hate to say that, but it's, you play it too much and treacle comes out of your speakers.
Well, let's have a listen for ourselves. This is again from the film Lost Horizon.
where the air you breathe is soft and clean, and children play in fields of green, and the sound of guns doesn't pound in your ears. Have you ever dreamed of a place far away from it all, where the winter winds will never blow, and living things have room to grow, and the sound of guns doesn't pound in your ears anymore? Many miles from yesterday, before you reach tomorrow, where the time is always just today. There's a long horizon waiting to be found. There's a lost horizon where the sound of guns doesn't pound in your ears anymore.
I mentioned also in the introduction that you have collected a lot of movie memorabilia over the years. Quite
Oh,
impressive, I would say. And I'm just kind of curious I mean, it's one thing to kind of collect the music from films and those sorts of things. I guess two-part question, what got you into collecting things like posters, which I think is your primary item that you collect?
uh,
And then second of all, do you have, I bet you do, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have any idea how much stuff you have?
actually, yes, I do. I'll answer
I
that because
figured
that
you
was
would. You
pretty
probably have an
easy.
inventory list, don't you?
I do. I had to start one, just so if heaven forbid anything happened, I would have a list of what I have. But I have about 625 film posters,
Wow.
primarily one sheets. But yeah, and the way I got into it, I never knew you could own the poster you see outside the cinema. I was like,
Yep,
I
I
could
was in the same
have that.
boat.
Really? Oh my goodness. And I learned all that from a mutual friend, Gary Ferruda. And
Ah.
yeah, Gary had mentioned having these posters, and I'm going, you can have James Bond posters? Whoa! And yeah, I never knew because it's not something that the average person can walk into a film poster shop and say, "Oh yes, I'll take a You Only Live Twice there. Thank you very much." You really don't do that. You have to go through specific collecting places, and there are shops that specialize in original film posters. But to get my first film poster, we have to thank another mutual friend, Mr. Clyde Ponder.
Mm-hmm.
Clyde lives in Dallas, and Clyde is also a film poster collector, but he
Oh,
got a
yeah.
jump start. He started collecting even before he was in high school, and there were several shops in Dallas that he would frequent. And he actually took me to one of them. It was Duncan Poster Service, and it was run by this wonderful, wonderful, robust Texan woman named Dee Duncan, and she inherited it after her husband passed away. We went in there several times, and it's one of those places. When I walk into a place like that, I'm like a kid in a candy shop. My mind blanks out, and I can't remember what's on my must-have list because I'm just surrounded by all these goodies. And but anyway, I did not know Clyde in person until after I graduated college, but I corresponded with him for all 5 years because he was good friends with a mutual friend who was in architecture school with me, who lived across the hall in our residence hall.
Huh.
He said he saw my James Bond stuff, which at that time was like reproduction photos and things like that I had in my room. And he says, "Oh, you like James Bond? You need to talk to this friend of mine, Clyde." And then, like a week later, he said, "I'm writing a letter to Clyde," because back then we actually actually wrote letters.
Yeah.
And I miss that. But anyway, he said, if you want to include a letter in it and introduce yourself, yeah, that's fine. So I wrote a quick letter and got a real nice letter back from Clyde. And probably like 3 weeks later, 2 weeks later, I get a package waiting for me at the campus mailbox, and I went down to collect it, and it was from Clyde. In it were a couple James Bond film posters that,
Wow.
and these were the double feature release posters. It's kind of fun because I'll look at online poster auctions and I'll see, my goodness, Clyde gave me that, and it's now going for $300 or
Yeah.
whatever. But anyway, that's what introduced me to it. And then Gary, the friend I mentioned earlier, told me about a shop on Long Island. Uh, I forget what it was called now.
You're not
The
talking about
movie
Jerry
gallery.
Olinger's, are you? I mean, that was
Oh
in the
gosh,
city, though.
no,
Yeah.
no, no, not him. Anyway,
Yeah. That's another story.
we shan't go there. But it was called the Movie Gallery, and it was run by a wonderful lady, and I can't remember her name. But you would write to her, and like I said, well, what kind of James Bond movie posters have you got? And you got a typewritten letter back with a list of their inventory. And then, I would go to my work study job, and every 2 weeks I got paid, and I pretty much turned the check over to the movie gallery in Long Island. And so I got uh, some really, really rare stuff that today it astounds me that, I could use up a $35 work study check and get something that today is worth, four figures.
This was not on your list, but I thought I would play this, and I hope you don't mind,
Not at all.
because I think this is a master class in film scoring.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
you and I both agree that On Her Majesty's Secret Service was one of the best scores he did for Bond.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And the thing is that I have found a lot of times that when there's an action sequence, there's all this bombastic music that to me doesn't really add a lot. The action should be enough of it as it is.
Yeah.
It's when there's not a lot of action going on that music can really heighten the tension or help describe the scene a little bit better. The
Yeah.
scene I'm thinking about and the cue I'm talking about is Gumball Safe. Now,
Yeah.
if you were to watch that without the music, it'd be probably the most boring, I don't know, 3 minutes of cinema ever.
Yeah.
But the music totally transforms it. What do you think?
Oh, it definitely does. And it gives a lot of tension to the scene. Because remember, James Bond's only got an hour to break into the dude's safe,
Right.
take pictures of the stuff that's in there that's relevant to his mission. Actually, it's not even his mission, it's now a personal quest. He's got to get out of there, lock everything up, leave no trace that he's been in there before the guy whose office he's burglaring comes back from lunch.
I know,
And
and
there's
it's just great. I just love it, don't you? I mean, it's amazing.
I really do, and they do have humor in there. And the Bond films used to have good humor.
Yes.
The humor is while he's waiting for his machine to crack the safe, he discovers a Playboy magazine in amongst all the Jury Zurich newsletters or newspapers, and he pulls this out. And then there's one more punch at the end when, as he's leaving, having locked up the office, he's tucking the centerfold into his jacket.
I know, it's terrific. Let's have a listen to this again. This is you got to. Hopefully, you've seen the movie, but if you haven't, it may not make a lot of sense. But if you've seen it, again, just imagine no music with this. It would be a very boring sequence, but with the music, it totally transforms it. This is a cue called Gumball Safe. It's from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and it's written by, in my view, the maestro, John Barry. We'll get back to the program in a moment. Let me tell you, I couldn't do this program without support from listeners just like you. When you press like or comment on a particular episode, it helps grow our audience. Now, admittedly, my audience is somewhat small compared to other podcasts, but it is growing, and I thank you for that growth. Now, how else could you help me keep the podcast going? Well, by becoming a patron of the program through patreon.com. For as little as $3 a month, you help me keep the program going, plus you gain access to special bonus clips from our guests each episode. By being a patron, you could also end up being a featured guest on future episodes. So please consider becoming a patron by visiting patreon.com/whatsthescore. That's patreon.com/whatsthescore, and what's the score is all one word. Your support is valued and appreciated. Please go to patreon.com and support us today. Thank you. One thing I found interesting that I didn't realize until here recently, that you've actually given many presentations or lectures on World War II. In fact, I remember you gave one actually at the World War II Museum in New Orleans some years back. What was it that drew you to that topic, and how did you get into actually being able to, to be able to give presentations and lectures on it?
Well, the interest was in the family. My dad was in World War II. He was a radio operator on Johnston Atoll in the Pacific. And later on, a friend here who was a retired Air Force sergeant sent me some aerial photos of Johnston Atoll. So for the first time, I could really see where my dad was stationed and
Wow.
just how dreary it would have been. I'm sure for the first couple of weeks, it was very exciting to be on this little pinhead of an island in the Pacific, and then how it would really get to you after a while. But Dad said they found many ways to amuse themselves, and and the guys of that generation were very modest about what they did. But anyway, Dad having been in it, I learned early, when he and I were building model airplanes, if it had that black cross on the side, those were the bad guys, and it
Right.
had the star in the white circle, those were the good guys, kind of a thing. So I learned, the difference between the two sides from Dad. Then started discovering World War II films. And this guy, Clyde, we talked about, and I share two favorites. He puts his on top of mine. I put mine right under his. But my favorite is Kelly's Heroes. And then his favorite, which is my second favorite, is Where Eagles Dare. So, you have these wonderful adventures. Some are just adventures. Some are an attempt to show the history of an event, like like Midway, that came out just
Right.
a few years ago. Yeah. So, and then of course you have fantastic scores that go with it, a lot of which involve just lots of drumming and march music, but some are just very sweeping and epical sounding scores. So,
Well, you-
there's. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, you mentioned one to me, pardon me. I guess it's not, well, maybe it's kind of tied to World War II a little bit, but it has an interesting backstory. I think the film was the film called Olympia. Is my memory right?
Oh, yes, 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 yes. In college, I started corresponding with Leni Riefenstahl. She was this Renaissance woman, started out as a classic dancer, classical dance. When she got injured, she couldn't do that anymore, so she got into film, and she was an actress. And she did a number of what they called alpine heroine, not the stuff you shoot in your arm, but a female hero films. Some of them involved some extremely intricate stunt work, which she did herself. So, but then she got into film production. She got behind the camera and realized that's where she wanted to be. And she directed several of these films. Well, along come these kind of horrid people called the Nazis. Hitler was actually enchanted with her films and commissioned her to do a documentary of the I think it was 33 Nazi Party rally. And she produced a very grand, sweeping, and actually kind of long and in places boring documentary called Victory of Faith. Then that got promptly pulled because it showed some of the Nazis who fell into disrepute even with the Nazis in good light. So that just absolutely disappeared. Eventually, a print was found about 15, 20 years ago in an attic in England. But to do this, Leni Riefenstahl realized it needed music to carry it along. It's what we were talking about earlier about the
Mm-hmm.
importance of film music to perk up the pace. And she hired a composer who had been very active in Germany in the 20s into the 30s named Herbert Windt. And Herbert Windt wrote some nice epical scoring for it. She liked that. So when she got hired to do her masterpiece, which was called Triumph of the Will, he scored that. And it was really that and Victory of Faith were two films that really were the pioneers in putting orchestral film music specifically for a film. You know, it had been used before. A lot of times it was off the shelf recordings, but nobody had sat down and wrote a complete score for a 2 or 2.5 hour film. And that's where we get to with Olympia. In Olympia, Frau Riefenstahl was hired by the International Olympic Committee, not the Nazi Party, by the way, but the International Olympic Committee, to produce a documentary of the 1936 Berlin Olympics. She approached it from, it actually became a two-part film. She had so much footage that there was one part called Festival of the People, and then the other was called Festival of Beauty. And it had the different Olympic events, but she found clever ways of shooting them. And an absolute stunning sequence occurs towards the very end of the film, which was the high diving championships. She had developed an underwater camera, so she was able to capture the divers as they entered the pool. But throughout the whole thing, Herbert Windt wrote just wonderful, perfect music that went along with the sequences. Again, this was done after the film had been edited, and he had to sit down and write music and time it to go with the film.
Right.
So there was a soundtrack produced for Triumph of the Will, and all it really was just plucked off the, the cinema soundtrack, so it had all the speeches and stuff. But there was never a soundtrack done for Olympia, and I had the brilliant idea that we could do it. Well, like I said, I had been corresponding with Leni Riefenstahl, sorry, and I wrote to her, and actually I went ahead and did it. And then I sent her a CD and a mock-up of the packaging and everything else. I got this great response from her that was very positive and encouraged me to go on. And, it was a very rough cut, so I was going to get it sent to a friend's studio, and he was going to tidy it up and make it sound better. But I had a good source material. It's actually a beta hi-fi print of the movie. And beta hi-fi is what Sony used to use to demonstrate digital sound.
Yeah, no, it was pretty good quality.
Yeah. So but she apparently liked everything. She liked my proposal that she autograph maybe like 100 copies of the CD, and they would be numbered, so they would be special collector's edition. And wouldn't you know it, she ups and dies before we can really launch the. I mean, come on, she lasted 105 years. Couldn't she hang on for another 6 months? No, really. Very, very fascinating woman. Her autobiography is so cool. Very interesting, captivating read. So there are exactly 3 copies of the original soundtrack to Olympia. I've got one, her production company has one, and I think I gave the other one to the guy who was going to do the sound engineering. So this is music off of it.
Wow. Well, let's see. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a very rare recording, obviously. But what we're going to hear is the evening flag twirling exhibition. This is one of the Festival of Beauty type scenes. There's beautiful lyrical filming and a lovely piece of music to go with it.
Oh, well, actually, I'm looking forward to this. So let's, I don't know if you could say a world premiere broadcast of this, but certainly it's a rarity that we appreciate Brian sharing it with us today. This is from the film called Olympia. And again, it's written by
Herbert Windt.
Okay. I'm not even going to try to say that one. I'll trust you to say it correctly. Let's sit back and have a listen to this beautiful piece of music. We've we've talked a lot about World War II films. It seems to me that you kind of like a variety of genres that not necessarily present day for the most part, maybe except for the Bond films, but you like kind of looking back at the various times in history. We've talked about World War II and that sort of thing. I'm assuming that probably Westerns are also a part of that genre that you like, and I know one of the cues that you chose was from the film Magnificent Seven and that fabulous theme that was written by Elmer Bernstein. Tell me a little bit about why you wanted to include that one.
Well, that goes back with that story about that last song in one of our early episodes of Stage and Screen when I had the Magnificent Seven soundtrack sleeve, and I pulled Lost Horizon out of it. We've already heard some Lost Horizon, but really, Elmer Bernstein was the master of the Western film music. He kind of inherited the baton from some of the early guys, Max Steiner and Miklos Rozsa, for example, because the Western film every now and then, I mean, even today, they're still making westerns, not quite in the mold of the old great ones that people knew from the 30s and the 40s, but still, they're capturing that segment of American history, rarely accurately, but you got all of the ingredients there to make a fantastic film, and yeah, so Elmer Bernstein is certainly one of the masters of it, and he's written a whole bunch. I have several of his scores. The Sons of Katie Elder is another one that has some great music in it. But this one, The Magnificent Seven, it's a classic. We've heard it. They used it for a cigarette commercial back in the 60s, back when they had cigarette commercials. So it really it epitomizes, I think, the music of the American West. And I'm not a huge fan of Westerns, but there are some I can watch over and over again. And this one is one of them.
Well, and certainly this is one of those themes, too, that is instantly recognizable by certainly the vast majority of the population. They may not even be able to name the fact that it's from Magnificent Seven, but they say, I know that piece of music.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a unique theme that deserves its place in cinema history. Let's have a listen for ourselves. This again is a main theme from the film, the original version of the film, Magnificent Seven, and it's written by Elmer Bernstein. Now, we've kind of glossed over it a couple of times and talked about where our main connection was, and that connection being the fact that we both were big fans of the James Bond films.
Oh, yeah.
And as we record this today, something just recently happened with that franchise, the production company that was in charge of it and that sort of thing. And so I'm kind of curious, what were your reactions to kind of some of the recent news about Eon Productions and Amazon and what the state of the franchise is going forward? What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, as all of a sudden, it's announced that she sold out. I mean, I think literally.
Yeah.
There could only have been a lot of money exchanging hands, but she is no longer protecting the image of James Bond. That is now totally in the hands of Amazon.com. So everybody's both a little nervous and very curious to see what might be happening with that.
Well, what did you think of what did you think of how do I say this? The last several films? Did you think that it was upholding the legacy that Broccoli and Saltzman had started, or had it really changed a lot? And did it change for the better? The films, particularly the last few,
The last few with Daniel Craig, so they started getting better after his Casino Royale. They took a plummet. There was this film Quantum of Solace, and a lot of us were very insulted by it, mainly because that was a great title, and it just got wasted on this frenetic, nonstop action film. And we joked when they announced that after that was going to be another film, and that one, we joked that, well, it could only be better because there was so much left over from the film before. Like there was unused tripods for the cameras because they all looked like handheld, and maybe there'll be a plot there. They didn't have much in the one before it, so they could maybe use one of the plots on the shelf. And anyway, we made all these bad jokes. The series did get better. It got some more depth to it when they started delving into the background of Ernst Blofeld. That was fascinating. They went back to a lot of source material, I think, that was available from Ian Fleming himself to start fleshing out that character. And there were scenes throughout that you saw plucked from the books. And as our mutual friend Gary Ferruda says, the books were always so much better written than the films. So you had a lot more character development, you had a lot more plot. So I was getting optimistic. And I was never fully happy with Daniel Craig in the role. I could think of so many other people that I would have liked to have seen carrying James Bond's Walther PPK, but not him.
Yeah.
And then, there was that big finale at the end of No Time to Die.
Oh, spoiler alert.
Yeah, well, not quite a spoiler alert, but there was, this big finale there. And I won't go into too much detail.
No, I'm halfway joking.
But coming out of the theater, I'm one of those people who stays all the way through the credits,
me
to
too.
the very end. And I later went outside, and there was a couple gentlemen I had seen leaving the same screening that I had been in, and they were out there. Oh, what are we going to do? How are they going to, get another James Bond movie because they killed the guy? Which, and I stopped and we started chatting, and I said, well, I saw you didn't stay to the very end. Oh, yeah, we stayed till the credits started rolling. And I said, well, you didn't stay to the very end because there was a message at the very end that gives everybody hope because it says James Bond will return. So now we just have to see how.
Yeah, and it's up to Amazon now, I guess.
Yeah,
well, one of the major contributors to the success of the Bond films, particularly in the first half, I guess, of all the 25 films that have been done, was composer John Barry, that we've already played some of his stuff. But there was another cue that you chose that is one of my favorites as well, and certainly one of my favorite scores, but this particular cue is just amazing. The cue is called Chinon and Eleanor's Arrival, and it's from the film Line in Winter. Tell us a little bit about why you wanted to include that today.
It's got a stunning score that he wrote. And this is, of course, not a James Bond film. This is historical conjecture. And the story itself, I mean, even the backstory is wonderful. You had Henry II, who was the Plantagenet king of England and half of France. It is known that he had a Christmas court in his castle at Chinon, which I visited, and which they shot some scenes there with King. Oh gosh, what was his name? It was the French king, and it was just
Oh,
it's a
Timothy Dalton.
yeah.
Oh,
Timothy Dalton
you
played
mean the
it, and I
actor, right? Yeah.
yeah, the actor was Timothy Dalton and did an awesome job. And the king, gosh, I feel so dumb. But anyway, they know that they had a sort of summit meeting, probably around this Christmas court. And the circumstances were just wonderful because, King Henry II was supposed to name his successor. He was supposed to have his successor marry the sister of the King of France, except there was the complication that she was Henry's mistress. And on top of it all, you had Henry's wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, who in herself was a very headstrong woman. So he had to keep her locked up in Salisbury Tower because she had led too many revolts against him. And she was played by the fabulous Katharine Hepburn, who
Oh,
got an
yeah.
Academy Award or second Academy Award for that. You have all of this fantastic stuff going on, along with, was it James Goldman, I think, wrote the screenplay based
Right.
on his play. And it just had sparkling dialogue that was so wonderful. Eleanor, and Henry were just at each other's throats so the whole film. And he strolls into her rooms, and this is around Christmas, and he goes, "Well, what shall we hang, the holly or each other?" Had stuff like that. But on top of it,
Talk to me about the music, if you
I
will.
was just getting there. On
Oh,
top
okay.
of it all, you had this incredible John Barry score. This was, it ended up being his second Academy Award after Born Free. And oh my word, the music, because he had to do a medieval setting. It took place in 1183. And he did just such an excellent job. And in fact, I've played the opening titles before on my radio show, and I would get phone calls from people saying, "Oh, I just love the music from The Exorcist." And, and I'm going, well, no, that's from The Lion in Winter. But yeah, but among the other pieces that he wrote is the one I chose for you. It is called Chinon and Eleanor's Arrival, and it's all the excitement at Chinon Castle because Queen Eleanor is coming for Christmas. And just this wonderful piece as her barge rolls up to the dock, and all that. Anyway, let's go ahead and listen to it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, and by the way, just I have to brag a little bit for in celebration of John Barry's 70th birthday at Radio City Music Hall. They had I forgot which orchestra it was, but they played live to screen the entire score, and they had a choir there and everything else. And John Barry was in attendance. That was the one time I got a chance to actually meet him personally, and it was magical to hear that score performed live. Anyway, with that in mind, let's go ahead and listen to this. Again, the cue is called Chinon, Eleanor's Arrival, and it's from the film Lion in Winter, written by John Barry.
John Barry.
Well, I mean, a lot of times I'll ask people, how can they stay in touch with you and those sorts of things. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I do know you said that you do have that special event that's coming up in April. If you want to give us another brief description of what that's all about so that people can, and let them know where they can find out more about it.
Yeah, the whole thing is educational. That's our big emphasis on this. And we do some, battle scenarios, the reenactors call it. So the guys get to run through the woods and pop away at each other with genuine World War II weapons, with blanks, emphasize. But we have an on-site museum. We have guided tours of the encampments. We have allies on the north side, allies are on the south side, excuse me, and the Axis on the north side. We have a history pavilion, which has what we call the history walk, which are these giant 4x8 panels with different stories about World War II. So you can spend a good day there and still not see everything. And we take over the City of Crestview Senior Center. That becomes our museum. It is April 4th and 5th, absolutely free to get in, free parking, and you can read about it. Our co-sponsor of this is the Crestview Historic Preservation Board, which has a Facebook page, Historic Preservation Board and Museum, and you'll see information about it there. And you can also email me if you like. My email address is HughesB, that's HUGHESB, at cityofcrestview.org.
And Crestview, as you mentioned, is about an hour east of Pensacola, Florida, in the Panhandle there, right?
It is. We are inland. We're the part of Florida that nobody believes exists. Everybody thinks it's one big beach. And, I mean, we've actually got hills. And,
yes, you do.
Yeah. So it's a wonderful place to live, great place to visit. We have a historic downtown that is still basically intact. And I can heartily recommend lunch at Desi's restaurant on Wednesdays because Miss Lois makes the most incredible meatloaf.
Well, listen, Brian, I can't thank you enough for joining us on the program today. I mean, your knowledge probably deserves about a 2 or 3 part podcast for all these things that and I know you love talking about this subject and all the subjects that we approached today. And I really appreciate you sharing some of that knowledge and the history that you have of films and World War II and collecting memorabilia and things like that. So, again, my sincere thanks for you joining me today. I've enjoyed it. I certainly hope you have.
I certainly have, and I owe you thanks too. In fact, all of film music lovers owe you a great big thanks, Frank, because it's thanks to people like you who perpetuate the love of film music and help people realize that there is some great stuff there that if you take away the action, you still have beautiful music to enjoy.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. It's certainly I'm not doing it to get rich or anything like that. It's just strictly because I just love the art form and also a lot of the people that we have on the program, the people that are associated with it, and certainly you're among those. So I appreciate that comment very much. So that'll probably wrap us up for today on today's program. Again, I want to thank our guest Brian Hughes for joining us, and of course thank our patrons that are helping to support the program through Patreon.com. We will have a bonus episode with Brian here that we'll share with you shortly as well. And, of course, I want to thank all our listeners for joining us and supporting the program. It's very much appreciated. And I guess with that, there's only one thing left for me to say, and that's simply this, that my name's Frank Wilson. My time's up. I thank you for yours. Thanks for listening to What's the Score?